Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon if you're in the East. My name is McIntosh. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Act0, and joining me in today's Fireside chat to provide some insight into SOC2 and its important to businesses and customers is Jerry Heinz, Head of Engineering here at Act0. Welcome, Jerry.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Glad to have you. So, quick housekeeping note before we get started. For audience members joining us live today, if you do have any questions, we will be addressing them at the end. So please do submit them via the question space on the right side of the screen, and we'll get to as many of them as possible at the end of the session. We have booked about 5 to 7 minutes to do that. So also keep in mind that today's conversation is based on our experiences and gained knowledge. As always, consult your auditor or your counsel for advice specific to SOC2. So in order to do business in today's environment, more organizations than ever before are requiring third-party security attestations like SOC2 from vendors to prove that they're safe business partners. Understanding which of those policies and controls you need to comply with and all the specific certifications can be a bit confusing. What's even tougher is ensuring that all necessary controls have been implemented and evidence has been properly documented. So on that note, Jerry, let's begin. Can you explain a little bit about what SOC is and more specifically SOC2?
Sure. So SOC is a collection of attestation frameworks around your internal controls and policies pertaining to finance and technical operations, and as well as there's some call outs specifically for security and data privacy and confidentiality. SOC2 in particular is really meant to address third-party concerns around risk by providing detailed evaluation of an organization's internal controls, their policies, and procedures. So that way, when you're working with a vendor, they're taking good care of your data, and they have strong hygiene and guarantees, and they run their business well in a way that you can trust.
Perfect. So a bit of a follow-up here. Can you maybe go into a little bit of detail about what is the importance between a vendor and a customer perspective?
Sure. So if you're if you're a customer going to working directly with the company, right? Really, what the SOC 2 there is talking about is you're telling your customers you can trust us. You can trust how we secured our business, how available we are. That your data is going to be safe when you give it. When you're working with a vendor, right? So if you're a business and you're contracted with somebody for a service, right? So software as a service or infrastructure as a service, right? This is really about evaluating how much you can trust that vendor and what they're doing to protect your company's data, your customers' data on your behalf. And everything. And it's also going to talk about, what are kind of some of the shared responsibilities that you may have, and make those clear so that way you know how to operate safely with that vendor.
Is there any prescription per se for who has to demonstrate SOC 2 compliance?
I mean, generally no, except that you would look at your different regulatory environments, right? So SaaS companies, for example, are not required to have a SOC 2, but it's a good way to express to their customers, hey, we take this seriously, we take your data and privacy seriously. Industries that are more heavily regulated or more likely to require it. So if you're in finance, law, accounting, etc., right? You may be more pressed to have a SOC 2 or similar attestation. But largely, again, it's around building customer trust.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So another question I have for you is, so why now? What was the impetus for Act0 to begin this process?
Sure. So, from the very beginning, we look at SOC2 as a nice, as a nice milestone to really talk externally about all of the hard work the team's done over the past couple of years. So from the very beginning, if you look at SOC2, it's a collection of best practices, right, around around security and availability, et cetera. And so we've been working on that from the very beginning, and that's just kind of how we founded the company from the start, and the engineering and operations teams. And so we always knew that SOC2 and other frameworks, frankly, were necessary along the way for us to be able to express that level of trust. And so really we decided at this point it's a good time to start talking about it and everything. So we went ahead and went through the audit and everything, and now we've got the report to share.
Okay, so speaking of the audit, who performs the SOC audits? Is this something that the organization itself does?
No, you'll actually work with a third-party auditor here, and that auditor is certified from the American Institute of CPAs and everything, and they'll come in and they've been trained on the control environment, what to look for, and everything. And so your first step, if you believe that you need to go down this path, is finding a good auditor to work with in order to make that in order to get the ball rolling.
Okay. So I know that from my own knowledge that SOC2 is based on trust principles. Can you talk a little bit about the basic requirements for SOC2, specifically those 5 security trust principles?
Yeah, exactly. So SOC2 again, it's about reducing risk and expressing that to third parties of how organizations have the steps that organizations have taken to reduce that risk. There are really 5 areas, or these 5 trust principles that that SOC2 uses in order to express that. So the first one being security, then availability, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So at a high level of security, right? So it's that your information and systems are actually protected against any type of unauthorized access or unauthorized disclosure of information, and also protected against any type of damage that could possibly compromise availability, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Right, and then the next one, availability. It's really that those systems are up and available for operation, right? And so they can be used, and that there is disaster recovery to make sure that the system stays up, right? Processing integrity is the next one, and that's making sure that the data gets from point A to point B and is correct. Right, that it's not manipulated in some strange way that could lead to an incorrect result, and that if there is, that there's a process for dealing with that and for handling change and that sort of thing. Confidentiality, really, that the information is designated, and if it's confidential, that it actually stays confidential, right, and that there's define meaning to those words. They're not, and there's a difference between data that's, available for public use and something that might be top secret, right? And everything, and that data is handled in different ways. And then lastly, privacy, right? That any personal information that's collected is used, retained, and discarded according to a set policy that is respected and operationalized and implemented, right? And it's very clearly stated what that is, and the organization actually meets that bar.
Okay, so really high, really good top level. I'm going to drill down a little bit deeper on those with you. So let's dive into some of the specific elements of the examination itself. As you just mentioned now, data privacy and confidentiality are both driving trust principles of SOC2. So when considering a vendor, are there any specific questions that a customer should ask or things that they should be looking for?
Yes. As you're looking for a vendor, right, and you're kind of trying to figure out, okay, well, what should I be using and everything. You really need to understand what is the data that they're collecting, what's going to be posted over it, right? So, For example, if you're using a cloud service for your database, right? If you're storing personally identifiable confidential information in that database, well, then you should be you should ask that vendor for their SOC2 or other type of attestation that says, look, how are you protecting this customer's data? If I store that personally identified data, is it going to, how are you doing it? How do you respect it? What are controls are in place to make sure that that's it's not violated? Because for your perspective, you'd be liable, right? So and you're gonna worry about that, and make sure that they're safe and secure. And so SOC 2 is going to tell you and spell this out for you. How do they classify data? How do they keep it confidential? How do they keep it private? So you can make a good decision that this is the type of vendor that you work with.
Yeah. Now, in terms of some of those practices vendors can do inside, you hear things often like AD group policies. Are they enough to ensure confidentiality amongst the organization?
If only. So AD, you mean Active Directory.
Yeah.
For security, it's a really great first step, right? Especially if you're in a completely Windows-based environment, right? But it may be necessary, but it's certainly not sufficient. Right. Just very simply, right. If you have different types of machines in your environment, Active Directory may not cover them, right? If you're using Macs or something else. But then too, SOC 2 is going to talk at a higher, broader level, right? And it's, what is your group access policy? What is your workstation update policy? How are you keeping, what's patch management? How do you deal with change? How do you train people about how to use it and everything? So it's going to be much more comprehensive than simply, just set up a group policy that handles a system update or that enforces this particular lockdown or make sure that you can't plug in a USB key into your device. It goes a lot further and a lot broader than that.
Yeah, and I'm assuming the same is probably for like multi-factor authentication as well, and we can passwordless as well. So, is MFA actually a requirement for SOC 2?
Yes. So some form of two-factor MFA is required. I mean, there are exceptions, that you could potentially seek depending upon your very specific case, right? And that is something to keep in mind, is that these controls are put in place for you to they're a set of best practices and everything. There may be cases where it's not possible, and you would then talk with your auditor about it, and you'd work with them in order to figure out what is the right way to meet the standard and meet the control in your specific environment. But generally speaking, if you're not using MFA, you probably should be.
Yeah, I can second that. So another important detail a lot of businesses overlook when evaluating a vendor is data processing. Not just storing it, is how it's actually being used, where it's being used, and who's seeing it. So what does SOC 2 tell us about those capabilities? Sure.
So SOC 2 is going to tell you a lot about those capabilities. At a high level, it's going to take you through a very, it'll take you through a high level data flow diagram, right? And here's how the systems are actually laid out, right? It's not going to be terribly deep for the public version, but your auditor is actually going to walk through that, and then they're going to look at, okay, well, so as the data is moving from system to system throughout it, how do you ensure that data integrity is maintained? How do you know if the data got manipulated, or worse, an attacker got in there and made some changes to the environment and everything? And so it's going to look at all of your processes, not just the system in operation and the alerts and monitors and things that you might have around it, but then also how you deploy the software, right? And how you get it out into the production. Is that a repeatable process, or is it something that that can change over time? We laugh internally about our artisanally baked builds, right? They tend not to fly in an environment like SOC 2, the controls that they put in place. You want something that's consistent, repeatable, that you can track and test and audit over time.
Yeah, I think that becomes important later on as well. We'll talk about that in a bit. Now, most service organizations like us, we're providing an outsourced service. And a lot of us will have contractual obligations and requirements from our other vendors, specifically around service availability. I've heard you talk about this a lot. So how critical is this as a trust principle?
Well, we joke about this internally, right? So, Act Zero, we have a set of core values that we hold dear, and they really they take on how we do what we do, right? It starts with trust, it goes to customer focus, execution, continuous improvement, and we typically talk about them in that order because from a trust perspective, if you can't trust your security company who has sensors in your network and everything and is trying to help find the bad guy, then kind of who can you trust, right? And one of the easiest ways to lose trust is if you're not available. And so, we talk a lot about our system resilience. When things fall over in the middle of the night, we want a system that actually picks it up and then notifies us after the fact. Oh, this happened. Don't worry about it. System's up and available and everything. So availability is one of these things that generally can get an eye roll. And people are like, oh yeah, it's fine. If it's up 95% of the time, it's fine and everything. But that means real time out that you might be trying, your customer may be trying to use your service and it's falling over and it's not there. And it's all it takes is for that to happen, for that customer to start questioning, hey, do I want to stick around with this or do I want to go somewhere else? And so, availability really key to building trust, and it's why it sits here in this in the SOC 2.
Now, I know within that trust principle as well, security incident handling is a big component of the service availability. Are there any questions customers can ask their vendor, like any telltales?
Sure, around security incident management.
Yes,
yeah. I mean, ask when was the last time you dealt with a security incident? How did you come back from that? What do you do? How will I know if there's a problem? Right. This kind of goes part and parcel with availability. I always advise people to ask about, hey, when was the last time that you had a major outage or an event? What happened there? Right. And see if the right people on the call will give you a good answer, and if somebody's not talking about it, if they've never had a failure, which I don't know, I've been around in tech for long enough that I find it hard to believe, oh yeah, we were fine, and they don't want to provide any detail about it and everything. Well, then that should give you pause, right? Tech folks like to talk about how successful they are in dealing with incidents and keeping things up and running. So yeah, get them talking.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying it's like an ounce of due diligence is going to pay off in pounds later on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know today we may have some audience members debating undertaking SOC 2 Type 1 examination themselves. What advice do you have for them?
Sure. One, start early. We mentioned finding an auditor. Even before that, like that's maybe step one. Step zero is start best practices, right? The SOC 2 controls are available. You can find them, but as you read through them, you'll realize that they're not surprises and everything. And if you're adopting best principles from the get-go, it makes your life a lot easier. Document all the things, right? So there's a huge documentation process because Type 1 is going to be about this is what we claim to do, right? And so you're going to have to show your acceptable use policies and your hiring guides, as well as your change management processes and how you manage code and everything. And so like have that stuff in place. It's good to have anyway for your company, right? And then when you go to actually do the audit, it's that much easier. So start best practices, then go find an auditor, talk to a few of them. Interview them, find somebody who works with you. Our auditor was great because they got us, they got our environment, they understood what's going on. And so when the going got tough and we had questions and everything, they were able to give us really strong advice that helped cut down the time that it took and everything. And so that and presumably if you go from type 1, which is point in time, to type 2, which is now you've got to observe over a period of time. But this is somebody you're going to be working with for quite a while. So you want to make sure that that there's a good working relationship there. That really can't be overstated.
In terms of you just mentioned, in terms of timing, you said you're going to be working with them for a while. How long does this SOC2 Type 1 examination usually take?
I've been through a few of these. I'll say, ours was at Act Zero was a bit of a nice feather in the cap. It only took us about a week to go through the audit and everything. It really took longer to prepare the report than to do it. But again, it's because there was a lot of that preparation before it. But I've been in environments where they didn't start until it was like, oh my gosh, I need this, and now I'm under the gun. And there, getting that documentation together is the thing that takes a while. The average, in my experience, has been 1 to 2 months to get all the prep work done, to work with the auditor and everything, to get ready up to the point where now you're going to pull the trigger and run through the, and run through the audit. But there are definitely horror stories. I'm sure folks on the call can if you've been through it before and everything like that, or have heard people who've been through it before, that it's taken a very long time, and that really gets to that ounce of prevention and preparation goes a really long way. On the type 2 side, that really, it has to be observation over time, right? So the minimum you'll ever realistically see is about 6 months, but mostly it's a year. Right, and you want to look back and say, like, hey, all those policies and everything like that we put in place, that we said that we did and everything. Look, here's the historical proof that we're actually doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And so you'll check in with your auditor a few times over the course of that year, and then make sure that everything is progressing nicely.
Nice. And you just hit on SOC2. So effectively, I think what I'm hearing too is, if you struggled with the type 1 examination, there's a few things you're going to need to get in place for your type 2 examination. Yep. So I'm glad you hit on that. Now I see we're about 22 minutes in right now, and I know that we did want to be able to jump to some audience questions. So I'm going to take a quick look. We do have 3 here, so hopefully we'll get to all 3. The first one is, how important is data residency to privacy?
It's a good question. Data residency would presumably mean by that is where is the data physically located, in a virtual environment, right? And so what data center, right? Is it in is it in a public cloud? Is it in a colo? Is it in a closet or under your desk, right? And that's going to the jurisdiction that you're in, right? So state or country, right, is gonna have a lot of sway as to the rights you have to protect that data and everything. And so I always advise, I'm not a lawyer, but talk with your counsel if you've got concerns that that your data needs a certain level of privacy, and you're not unsure of the environment that you're that you're in, or what the laws of the country are, what regulations are in place, and then also what rights you have to make others available to that to that data. Right, so just always talk with counsel and get that cleared up. But it can, where that data resides can impact a lot of what you can and can't do.
Perfect, thank you. What else do I have here? How do we get a copy of your report?
Well, if you're a customer, you can request it. As part of it, we didn't talk about it earlier, but trust is a two-way street. And in order to get, in order for us to fulfill our obligations and our trust to our customers and everything, there are a set, they're called complementary user entity controls, and they're really the shared responsibility, right? So we make the controls available to our customers and say, look, if you're going to get the maximal benefit and the maximal risk reduction, then you need to implement these as well. So, yeah, if you're a customer, please request it. Happy to give it to you. If your prospect far enough along in the process and everything, you can request it as well, and we're happy to discuss it with you.
Yeah, and I'll actually add a bit of a follow-on here. There is within SOC as well, there's the SOC for cybersecurity examination. So if you're going through that as a customer, talk to us about using our report. It may potentially be permissible to use it as supporting documentation for your own practices. So please do feel free to follow up with us on that as well.
Yeah.
So what else do I have here? I do have another question, and that is, how would I get around a multidimensional regulatory environment?
Good question. And so with that again, I always start with first principles. What are the requirements? What are the dimensions you need to operate on? Right. Get them written out and documented down and everything like that. Then go seek advice. Right. Go talk to counsel if you've got any concerns in understanding what is being expected of you. Right. And then frankly, with things like public cloud offerings, there's lots and lots of IaaS and PaaS and SaaS that you can use. Go find vendors that already meet a lot of those requirements for you, so they can take a lot of the burden off of you. If you're able to reduce down what you need, to a manageable list, that's really differentiated for your business. Then you get to spend the time solving the real problems, right? and push some of that those other regulations off to your vendors, right? And you can leverage the tools like SOC2 and everything to make sure that they're meeting it in a way that's needed for your for your particular business case.
Sage advice, yeah. And again, go speak to your own counsel as well to make sure that you're getting the best advice as well. So one final question that has come in: what if I have a gap, and I'm assuming that means identified in the SOC2 process? What do I do?
Don't panic. This is really where your relationship with with your auditor is really going to help. The nice thing about SOC 2, it sounds, type 2 can sound scary, especially when you start looking at all the controls and everything you have to do. It's a lot, right? And if you haven't been fortunate enough to be able to practice those best practices, there's myriad reasons why you might not have been able to do that from the beginning, right? And you're playing a little bit of a game of catch up. The great thing about type 1 is it's essentially an open book examination. Like, they're best practices. There's steps that you can take and implement and everything, and your auditor can help point you in those directions and kind of help work it. It's very, very common to have a gap, right? Of like an oops moment. One of the ones that's come up in the past for me was oh shoot, those complementary user entity controls. Yeah, we didn't audit one of a couple of our vendors and look at their SOC 2s and say, oh yeah, what do we have to implement over here? And oops, and so we didn't do that. And we had to quick scramble to put that process in place and then put the review process in place. It's not that big of a deal because the auditor was like, hey, you missed this. This is what it would look like. And, oh, I have a handy template that you can use and everything. And so like a good partner goes a long way here. So, one, don't panic, and then ask the expert for advice, and you'll get through it just fine.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's been fantastic speaking with you today, Jerry. I know we've basically come to our time. So, I appreciate, and I know the audience will, your time, your valuable insight. I know it feels like we've probably only begun to scratch the surface on the examination itself and what SOC does and doesn't do. And thank you to our audience members who have been with us. If we didn't get to a question or you have one after, please feel free to send it through to info@act0.ai and we'll get back to you ASAP. For more information about ensuring your data and systems are secure, we're constantly turning out new content. We've included in the review section today a CXO insight piece on SOC2 examinations, and available on our website. You'll find a number of other offerings as well. So thanks again for joining us today. We hope you've learned a little bit about SOC2 and our team here at Act0. And we're hoping to help you cover more ground in your journey to improving your security maturity. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.